Genetically incompatible with continuation, the old physician announced, his voice echoing off the crystal walls. The bloodline ends with her. Salith stood perfectly still. Her silver skin showed no emotion. Her violet eyes revealed nothing. She had learned long ago that the court of 7 moons fed on weakness, like predators fed on wounded prey. Around her, 200 nobles watched with hungry eyes. Some pretended sadness. Others did not bother to hide their satisfaction. Her uncle, High Regent Malthois, stood closest to her father's throne. His thin smile told her everything she needed to know. The Zurithi were an ancient people. They had traveled between stars when humans still lived in caves. Their silver skin glowed with patterns of light that showed their emotions. Their lives stretched across 800 years. They were proud. They were beautiful. They were perfect, and they were dying. For 10,000 years, fewer and fewer children had been born. The genetic perfection that made them superior had become a trap. Their bodies rejected anything different. Their bloodlines grew weaker with each generation. Salith was the last of the imperial line. Her mother had died giving birth to her. Her father, Emperor Kethvorath, sat on his throne with the wasting plague slowly killing him from within. The physicians gave him perhaps 10 more years, 10 years for Salith to produce an heir. And now, with one sentence, that hope had been erased. The examination is complete, the physician continued. There is no possibility of error. The princess cannot bear children with any Zarithi male. Her genetic markers are too degraded. Malthois stepped forward, his own silver skin glowing with false concern. This is indeed a tragedy for the Empire. My heart breaks for my beloved niece. He turned to face the assembled nobles. But the succession must be secured. Perhaps it is time to consider alternative arrangements. Salith knew what that meant. Without an heir, the throne would pass to Malthois when her father died. Everything her family had built across 12,000 years would belong to him. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tear down the crystal walls with her bare hands. Instead, she bowed her head in acceptance. I thank the court for its concern, she said, her voice steady. I will need time to consider my future. She walked out of the great hall with perfect grace. She did not run. She did not cry. She waited until she reached her private chambers before she allowed herself to break, far across the galaxy. On a burning world called Kethvora, Sergeant Marcus Cole had no time to think about princesses or politics. Move. 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 He shouted as plasma fire tore through the air above his head. The Vreckener were attacking again. The insect-like aliens had no fear of death and no interest in peace. They simply wanted to consume everything in their path. For 3 months, the human soldiers of the 142nd Division had held this position against endless waves of attackers. Marcus dove behind a broken wall as an explosion shattered the ground where he had been standing. His armor was cracked. His rifle was running low on charge. 2 of his soldiers were dead and 3 more were wounded. A normal commander might have called for retreat. Marcus was not normal. Jenkins, cover fire on my mark. Torres, get those wounded soldiers to the extraction point. Everyone else, follow me. They called his unit the Hellwalkers. They had earned that name on a dozen worlds, in 100 battles. Humans had only joined the galactic community 40 years ago, but they had already built a reputation. They were small. They were weak. They lived barely a century, and somehow, impossibly, they kept winning. The Zarithi thought it was luck. The Vreckener thought it was madness. Marcus knew the truth. Humans won because they refused to accept defeat. They adapted. They improvised. They got back up when any sensible species would stay down. The battle lasted another 6 hours. When it ended, Marcus stood among the bodies of 100 Vreckener warriors. His armor had failed. 3 plasma burns marked his chest and arms. By Zarithi's standards, he should have been dead twice over. He was still standing when the distress call came through. All units, this is command. The Zarathi diplomatic shuttle has crashed behind enemy lines. Priority 1 retrieval. Survivors reported. Marcus looked at his exhausted soldiers. They had been fighting for 18 hours straight. They had no backup, no support, and almost no ammunition. "Hellwalkers," he said. "Looks like we're taking a walk." Nobody argued. Nobody complained. They simply checked their weapons and followed him into the darkness. They found the shuttle 2 hours later. It had crashed in a valley surrounded by Vreckener patrols. The hull was torn open. Bodies lay scattered across the ground. Most of them were Zerathi guards, their silver skin now dark and still. Marcus moved carefully through the wreckage, searching for survivors. He found one in the back of the shuttle. Hiding behind a storage container, she was the most beautiful creature he had ever seen. Her silver skin glowed faintly in the darkness. Her violet eyes were wide with fear, but she held a plasma pistol in steady hands. "I am Sergeant Marcus Cole of the Terran Alliance," he said slowly. "I am here to help you." The princess studied him for a long moment. She had never seen a human this close before. He was covered in blood and dirt. His face was scarred. His eyes were tired but determined. "And I suggest we leave quickly. More of the enemy are coming." They ran together through the darkness, the human soldier and the alien princess. The Vreckener found them twice. Twice, Marcus fought them off, while Salith provided covering fire. The third time, they were surrounded. Marcus counted 12 enemies. He had 4 shots left in his rifle. The math was simple. The math was death. He turned to the princess. "When I start shooting, you run. Head north. My people will find you." Salith looked at him with something strange in her violet eyes. "You would die for me? You do not even know me." Marcus shrugged. "It's my job." He raised his rifle and charged. He killed 4 of them before a plasma bolt tore through his shoulder. He fell, his vision going dark. The last thing he expected to see was more enemies closing in for the kill. Instead, he saw silver light. Salith stood over him, her skin blazing with patterns he did not understand. The plasma pistol in her hand fired again and again. When it ran empty, she picked up a fallen Vreckener blade and kept fighting. She was not a warrior. She had never been trained for combat. But something in her refused to let this strange human die alone. When reinforcements finally arrived, they found the princess standing guard over the unconscious soldier, surrounded by the bodies of 8 Vreckener warriors. She could have left him. She could have run when he told her to. Instead, she had stayed. As the medics carried Marcus away, Salith watched him with new understanding. She had spent her entire life among the Zerathi, a people who measured everything in centuries and calculated every action for advantage. This human had known, here for less than an hour. He had offered his life without hesitation. Perhaps she thought there was something to learn from these strange, short-lived creatures. Something her ancient people had forgotten long ago. The will to fight for something beyond yourself. 3 months passed like water through. Open hands, Salith returned to her duties at the Crystal Palace. She attended council meetings. She reviewed military reports. She smiled at nobles who wanted her dead and pretended not to notice the poison in their words. Her father grew weaker every day. The wasting plague had no cure. It aided him slowly, stealing a little more life with each passing week. Sometimes he did not recognize her. Sometimes he called her by her mother's name. Regent Malfoy's grew bolder. He placed his allies in positions of power. He controlled the flow of information to the Emperor. He spoke of preparing for transition as if Salith was already gone. The war against the Vreckener continued. The Zerathi fleet held the line, but barely. They needed more soldiers, more ships, more resources. The noble houses refused to provide them. Why spend their wealth on a war when they could use it to position themselves for the coming change in power? Salith saw her empire crumbling. She could do nothing to stop it. Then the report arrived. It came from Dr. Alina Vasquez, a human scientist working on a classified research station. Salith had never met her, but she had funded her work for years. The doctor studied something that most Zerathi considered impossible: cross-species, kinetic compatibility. The report was short. Its implications were enormous. Human DNA demonstrates unprecedented adaptability, Salith read aloud in her private chambers. Preliminary testing suggests successful bonding potential with multiple carbon-based species, including Zerathi genetic structures. Further research recommended. Salith read the report 3 times. Her hands were shaking. For 10,000 years, her people had tried everything to solve their fertility crisis. They had used genetic engineering. They had tried cloning. They had searched 100 worlds for compatible species. Nothing had worked. Now a human scientist was telling her that the answer might have been walking among the stars for 40 years. Salith thought of the soldier who had offered his life to save hers. She remembered his scars, his determination, and the strange fire in his eyes when he had charged. Impossible odds. She made her decision. The request went through military channels. Princess Salith, Verant formally asked for Sergeant Marcus Cole to be assigned as her personal Terran military liaison. The position would place him at her side indefinitely, serving as a bridge between the Zerathi Empire and the Terran Alliance. The Terran commanders were surprised but pleased. They needed Zerathi jumpgate technology to protect their colonies. A permanent representative at the Imperial Court would help secure that alliance. Marcus Cole was less pleased. He had spent 3 months trying to forget the silver-skinned princess who haunted his dreams. He had returned to duty, fought in 2 more battles, and earned another set of scars. He had told himself that she was royalty, that she lived in a different world, that he would never see her again. Now he was being ordered to stand at her side forever. "This is political," his commander explained. "The princess requested you specifically. Something about saving her life. The Alliance needs this, Cole. We need those jump gates." Marcus wanted to refuse. He wanted to stay in the mud and blood where he belonged. But he was a soldier, and soldiers followed orders. 2 weeks later, he stood in the Crystal Palace of Zereth Prime. The palace was unlike anything he had ever seen. Walls of living crystal rose toward a sky filled with 7 moons. Gardens of bioluminescent flowers stretched in every direction. Everything was beautiful, perfect, and completely alien. Marcus felt like a stain on a white cloth. The princess received him in her private study. She looked different here than she had in the burning wreckage of her shuttle. Her silver skin was immaculate. Her violet eyes were calm. She wore robes that probably cost more than everything Marcus had ever owned. But when she looked at him, he saw something familiar. The same determination he had seen when she stood over his body with a stolen blade. "Thank you for coming, Sergeant Cole," she said. "I was ordered to come, Your Highness." A small smile crossed her lips. "Yes, I suppose you were." She gestured to a chair. "Please, sit. We have much to discuss." Marcus sat. He felt wrong in this beautiful room, surrounded by crystal and light. His hands were rough. His face was scarred. He did not belong here. "You saved my life," Salith said. "Now I must ask you to save my empire." She told him everything. She explained the infertility decree and what it meant for her future. She described her uncle's plans and the political games being played around her father's dying body. She spoke of Dr. Vasquez's research and the impossible possibility it represented. The doctor believes that human genetic adaptability could allow successful reproduction with Zerathi, Salith said. "If this is true, I could produce an heir. I could save my throne, my family's legacy, and perhaps my entire species." Marcus listened in silence. His mind was racing, but his face showed nothing. "I am not asking for love," Salith continued. "I am offering a contract, a partnership. You would receive wealth, status, and whatever else you desire. In return, you would help me conceive an heir." She paused, her violet eyes meeting his. "I know this is strange. I know we come from different worlds. But I am running out of options, Sergeant Cole. My uncle will destroy everything I love if I cannot stop him. This may be my only chance." The room fell silent. Outside, the 7 moons cast their light across the crystal walls. Marcus thought about his life. He had grown up in the slums of New Detroit. He had joined the military because it was better than starving. He had fought across a dozen worlds and watched friends die in his arms. He had never expected to live past 30. Now an alien princess was asking him to father a child that might change the future of an empire. He should have refused. This was politics beyond his understanding. This was a world where he did not belong. Every rational thought in his head told him to walk away, but he kept seeing her standing over his wounded body, fighting enemies she had no chance of defeating. She could have left him. She had stayed. "What happens to you if I say no?" he asked. Salith's face did not change, but her skin flickered, just for a moment, with patterns of deep blue and gray. She did not answer. Marcus understood. Her silence told him everything. If he refused, she would face her uncle's schemes alone. She would watch her father die and her throne stolen. She would become nothing, forgotten by an empire that had already written her off. He thought about the soldiers he had led into battle. He thought about the oath he had sworn to protect those who could not protect themselves. He thought about a princess who had picked up a blade for a stranger. "I have some conditions," he said finally. Salith's eyes widened slightly. "Name them." "First, I'm not going to be some hidden secret. If we do this, I stand beside you publicly. I won't be something you're ashamed of, agreed? Second, this child isn't just a political tool. If I help bring a life into this universe, I'm going to be a real father. Not some distant figure. A father." Salith was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than before. "I would want nothing less." "Third," Marcus said, leaning forward, "when the time comes, I get to punch your uncle in his smug face." For the first time since they had met, Princess Salith Vorinketh laughed. It was a strange sound, rusty from disuse, as if she had forgotten how. "Sergeant Cole," she said, "I believe we have an agreement." She extended her hand in the human fashion. Marcus took it. Her skin was cool against his palm. Her fingers were longer than a human's, more delicate, but her grip was strong. Neither of them knew it then. But that handshake would change the galaxy. Forever, the arrangement was supposed to be simple. Political. A contract between two people who needed something from each other. Neither of them expected what happened next. Marcus moved into quarters near the princess's chambers. His official title was military liaison to the imperial court. His unofficial duty was to stay close to Salith at all times, learning the rhythms of Zerathi politics while they waited for Dr. Vasquez's treatments to take effect. The treatments were complex. Human and Zerothi biology were different in 1,000 ways. The doctor needed time to prepare them both, to adjust genetic markers and synchronize biological cycles. Weeks turned into months as they underwent procedure after procedure. During that time, Marcus and Salith learned about each other. He taught her to play poker. She was terrible at first, her luminescent skin patterns betraying every emotion. But she learned quickly, and soon she could bluff well enough to take his money. She taught him to read those same patterns. The blue of sadness, the gold of joy, the deep purple of anger. After a while, he could understand her moods before she spoke a word. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. He told her about Earth, about cities that reached toward the sky and oceans that stretched beyond the horizon. She told him about Zereth, about traditions that stretched back before humanity discovered fire and expectations that weighed heavier than stars. He made her laugh. It happened more often now, that rusty sound growing smoother with practice. She had spent centuries learning to hide her emotions. With him, she forgot to hide. She made him think. For the first time in his life, Marcus considered a future beyond the next battle. He imagined a life that did not end in blood and fire. Salith's handmaiden, a young Zerathi woman named Thessaly, watched these changes with growing concern. "You are falling, Highness," she warned one evening, as she prepared Salith for sleep. "Your patterns glow whenever he enters the room. Everyone can see it." "I control my patterns perfectly," Salith replied. "You used to. Now they betray you." Thessaly's voice was gentle but worried. "Zerathi do not fall gently, Highness. We fall completely. If you love this human, you will never be able to hide it." Salith did not answer. She did not need to. They both knew the truth. Regent. Malthus also noticed the change. He had expected the princess to suffer in silence after her infertility decree. Instead, she seemed stronger every day. She spoke with more confidence in council meetings. She challenged his proposals with sharper arguments. Something had given her hope, and Malthus needed to know what. He sent spies to watch her chambers. He intercepted communications between the palace and Dr. Vasquez's research station. Piece by piece, he assembled the truth. The princess was trying to conceive a child with the human soldier. Malthus felt rage burning in his chest, but he forced himself to think clearly. If this plan succeeded, his claim to the throne would vanish. The degraded bloodline he had mocked would continue through a half-human heir. He could not allow that to happen. The regent gathered his allies in a secret meeting. They discussed options. Assassination was too obvious and would raise suspicions. Political maneuvering would take too long. They needed something that would destroy the human permanently and legally. One of his advisors, an ancient noble named Lord Vareth, provided the answer. The trial of purity, Vareth said with a cold smile. It has not been invoked in 3 centuries, but the law still stands. Any citizen may challenge a claim to royal succession by accusing the claimant of corrupting the imperial bloodline. Elise considered this. And the accused must defend their honor through combat? Through their champion, yes. If the princess is human as her chosen consort, he would be required to fight. The challenger may select any warrior in the empire as their champion. Any warrior, Malthus repeated, including Commander Varric. The room fell silent. Commander Varric was a legend. He had served in the Imperial Guard for 200 years. His blade had killed more enemies than anyone could count. No warrior in the Empire could match him. No human could possibly survive him. The law is clear, Vareth confirmed. The human cannot refuse the trial. The princess cannot protect him. And when he dies, the claim of corruption will be proven. The princess will be disgraced, and any heir she produces will be declared illegitimate. Malthus smiled for the first time in weeks. Prepare the accusation. The announcement came during a full session of the Court of 7 Moons. Regent Malthus stood before the assembled nobles and accused Sergeant Marcus Cole of corrupting imperial blood through unnatural congress with a royal personage. He demanded a trial of purity to cleanse this stain on the stain. Empire's honor. The court erupted in chaos. Some nobles shouted in support. Others protested that the law was ancient and barbaric. Through it all, Salif stood frozen, her skin blazing with patterns of fury and fear. Marcus stood beside her, his face calm. He had faced death many times. This was just one more enemy. The law is clear, the High Arbiter announced when order was restored. The accused must answer the challenge. Princess Salith, do you acknowledge this human as your chosen consort? If she denied it, Marcus would be arrested as a criminal. If she confirmed it, he would face the trial. I do, Salith said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. Then Sergeant Marcus Cole must face the trial of purity. Regent Malthus, name your champion. The regent's smile was poison. Commander Varric, whispers filled the hall. Everyone knew what this meant. The human was dead. Later in her private chambers, Salith raged. This is murder, she shouted, pacing back and forth. He cannot expect you to fight Varric. The commander has 2 centuries of experience. He is the greatest warrior our empire has ever produced. Marcus sat quietly, watching her patterns swirl with emotion. How long until the trial? 7 days. It is tradition. Salith stopped pacing and looked at him with desperate eyes. We could run. The Terran Alliance would protect you. We could escape to human space. And your throne. Your father? Everything you've worked for? None of it matters if you die. The words hung in the air between them. Salith's skin blazed with colors she had never shown anyone. Patterns that spoke of fear and love and desperate hope. Marcus stood and walked to her. Gently, he took her hands in his. "I'm not going to run," he said. "I'm not going to let that smiling snake win. And I'm definitely not going to let him take everything from you. You cannot beat Varric. No human can." Marcus smiled. It was the same smile he had worn when charging impossible odds, the same expression that had terrified enemies across a dozen worlds. "Your uncle made a mistake," he said. "He studied my military record. He knows how many battles I've won, how many scars I carry, how many times I should have died. How is that a mistake? Because he studied Marcus Cole, the soldier." Right. His grip tightened on her hands. "He didn't study humans. He doesn't understand what we are." Salif searched his eyes for doubt and found none. "What are you?" "We're the species that looked at the stars and said, 'We're going there when we could barely fly.' We're the ones who cure diseases by injecting ourselves with weaker versions of the disease. We're the idiots who strap ourselves to controlled explosions and call it transportation." He laughed softly. "We don't know how to give up. We literally never learned." Outside, the 7 moons rose over the Crystal Palace. In 7 days, Marcus Cole would face the deadliest warrior in the Xerthi Empire. He was still smiling. Salith pulled him close and held him tight. Her patterns glowed with emotions she could no longer hide. She had spent centuries learning to be cold and controlled. This human had destroyed all of it in a few short months. "If you die," she whispered, "I will burn this empire to ashes." Marcus held her back. "Then I'd better not die." It was not a promise he could keep. But in that moment, holding her in his arms, he decided he would try. For her. He would try anything. The arena of ancestors had not seen blood in 300 years. It was an ancient place. Carved from the living rock of Xerath's Prime's highest mountain, stone seats rose in endless tiers, filled with millions of Xerathi who had traveled from across the Empire to witness history. Billions more watched through holographic broadcasts. Their eyes fixed on the circular arena at the center, Marcus stood at the eastern gate, looking out at the sand that would soon be stained with blood. His blood, most likely. He wore simple armor provided by the Terran Alliance, light enough to move in, strong enough to stop a glancing blow. Nothing more. Commander Varric waited at the western gate. His armor was a masterpiece of Xerothi craftsmanship, layered crystal that had turned aside 1,000 strikes. His blade was a family heirloom, passed down through 15 generations of warriors. He had spent 2 centuries perfecting every movement, every technique, every way to kill. He looked at the human across the arena and felt only contempt. In the imperial box, Salif sat beside her father's empty throne. The emperor was too weak to attend, but tradition demanded royal witness. She wore the formal robes of her station. Her silver skin controlled too perfect stillness. Only Thessaly, standing behind her, could see how tightly her hands gripped the arms of her chair. Regent Malvoice sat nearby, surrounded by his allies. His smile had not faded in 7 days. He had already written the words he would speak when the human fell. Words of sorrow, words of necessity, words that would strip Salith of everything. The High Arbiter rose and spoke the ancient words. "Let the trial of purity begin. May the ancestors judge truly. May honor be restored." Varric moved first. He crossed the arena like flowing water, his blade singing through the air. 200 years of experience guided every step, every cut, every thrust. He was not just fast, he was perfect. Marcus barely dodged the first strike. The blade passed so close that it cut a line across his cheek. Blood dripped onto the sand. First blood, to the commander. The crowd roared. Varric pressed his advantage. His blade became a silver blur, attacking from angles that seemed impossible. Marcus retreated, blocking what he could, dodging what he could not. His movements were ugly compared to the commander's elegance. Desperate scrambles instead of flowing counters. The second cut opened his ribs. The third sliced his forearm. The fourth would have taken his head if he had not thrown himself backward at the last moment. Marcus hit the sand hard. His vision swam. Blood soaked through his armor in 3 places. In the Imperial box, Salif's control finally cracked. Her patterns blazed with terror as she watched the man she loved being carved apart. "Get up," she whispered. "Please get up." Rex stood over his fallen opponent, blade raised for the final strike. He had not even broken a sweat. This was not a battle. This was an execution. "Your kind does not belong among the stars," the commander said. "You are animals. Primitive. Weak. I will do the galaxy a service by ending you." Marcus looked up at him through blood-filled eyes. He thought about Salith. He thought about the child they might never have. He thought about every battle he had ever fought, every friend he had ever lost, every moment he had refused to surrender. Then he smiled. "You talk too much," he said. He rolled sideways as the blade came down. The strike that should have killed him only scored the sand. Before Varric could recover, Marcus was on his feet again. Something had changed. For the first 5 minutes, Marcus had been surviving, learning, watching. His human brain had been processing every movement the commander made, cataloging patterns and habits that Varric himself did not know he had. Now he understood. Varric attacked again. The same perfect techniques that had served him for 2 centuries. But this time, Marcus was ready. He slipped past a thrust by inches, reading the slight tension in Varric's shoulder that telegraphed the move. He dodged a slash by stepping exactly where Varric did not expect him to be. The commander frowned. No one had ever evaded that combination before. He attacked faster, harder, abandoning elegance for overwhelming force. His blade found Marcus twice more, adding new wounds to the old. Any Zirathi would have collapsed by now. Any sane creature would have surrendered. Marcus kept fighting. The crowd grew quiet. They had come to watch an execution. Instead, they were witnessing something impossible. The human was covered in blood. He should not be standing. He should not be moving. And yet every time Varric struck him down, he rose again. "Aud, what are you?" Varric demanded. Marcus did not answer. He was beyond words now, operating on something deeper than thought. Every wound was just information. Every failure was just a lesson. He had fought his entire life against enemies stronger and faster than himself. He had only ever had one advantage. He refused to lose. Varric's technique began to slip. Frustration crept into his movements. 200 years of perfection had not prepared him for an opponent who simply would not die. He swung too wide, too angry, leaving himself open for just a moment. Marcus saw the opening. He had been waiting for it. He feinted left, drawing Varric's blade in that direction. When the commander adjusted, Marcus deliberately stepped into the path of the strike. The blade cut across his forearm, adding another wound, but it also brought him inside Varric's guard. His human hand shot forward, faster than any Zirathi could track, and closed around the commander's throat. They stood frozen for an eternal moment. Varric's blade was raised but useless at this range. Marcus's grip tightened, cutting off air and blood. "Yield," Marcus said, his voice barely a whisper. Varric's eyes burned with hatred. He tried to break free, but his perfect technique had no answer for a human who refused to care about his own survival. "Yield," Marcus repeated. The commander's blade fell from his fingers. His body went limp. The High Arbiter's voice cut through the shocked silence. "The challenger's champion has fallen. The trial is complete. Honor is satisfied." Marcus released Varric and stepped back. His legs finally gave out, and he collapsed to his knees. Blood pooled beneath him. His vision was going dark, but he had one. The crowd erupted. Not with anger, but with something else entirely. The common Zirathi in the lower stands were cheering, their voices rising in waves of astonishment and admiration. They had watched legends their entire lives, perfect warriors who never struggled, never suffered, never showed weakness. This human had shown them something different. He had shown them that victory did not require perfection. It required only the refusal to surrender, but Regent Malthois was already moving. He had planned for this possibility, however unlikely. If the human somehow survived, there were other ways to destroy him. He shouted, "Arrest this creature for contaminating the royal bloodline." The Emperor himself signed the order. Guards moved toward Marcus, their weapons drawn. It was a lie, of course. The Emperor had signed nothing. But by the time anyone checked, the human would be in chains, and the scandal would be unstoppable. Salith rose from her seat. She walked to the edge of the imperial box and looked down at the arena. At the bleeding man who had given everything for her, her skin began to glow. Not with emotion this time. With something else, patterns of light spread across her body, ancient symbols that had not been seen in 10,000 years. They pulsed with colors beyond the normal Zarathi spectrum, blazing with power that made the air itself hum. The imperial blessing, the sign of the true bloodline. The mark of succession that could not be faked or denied. And at the center of that light, glowing brightest of all, was her abdomen. "The bloodline continues," Salith announced, her voice carrying across the silent arena. "The heir of two peoples grows within me." Dr. Vesquez's treatments had worked. Against all odds, against every law of Zerothi biology, the impossible had happened. Salith was pregnant. The regent's face twisted with disbelief and rage. His allies stumbled backward as if struck. The guards lowered their weapons, uncertain. Across the empire, billions of Zarathi watched as their princess stood radiant with ancient power and new life. They heard her words. They understood what they meant. The future had arrived, and it wore a human face. Marcus looked up at her from the bloody sand, and despite his wounds, despite his exhaustion, he laughed. "I told you," he managed to say. "Never tell a human something is impossible." Salith's patterns blazed with joy and love and triumph. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Zarathi Empire had hope, and it had come from the most unlikely source imaginable. The child was born on the longest night of the Zarathi year. When all 7 moons hung full and bright in the sky, they named her Alith, Voran-Cole. She came into the universe screaming, her voice strong and clear. The physicians who delivered her stepped back in wonder, their instruments forgotten in their hands. They had studied Dr. Vasquez's research. They had prepared for every possibility. None of them had prepared for this. Alith was beautiful. Her skin held the silver luminescence of her mother's people, but with golden undertones that caught the light like sunrise through clouds. Her eyes were violet like Salith's, but they sparkled with something warm and alive, something unmistakably human. She was smaller than a Zarathi infant, but stronger, her tiny hands gripping with fierce determination. She was both. She was neither. She was something entirely new. Marcus stood beside the bed where Salith lay exhausted but radiant. He reached down and touched his daughter's face for the first time. Her skin was cool like her mother's, smooth like his. She opened her eyes and looked at him, and he felt his heart crack open in ways he had never known were possible. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I'm your father. I'm going to protect you forever." Salith's patterns glowed with colors that had no names, emotions too complex for any language to capture. She had spent her entire life being told she could not have this moment. She had been declared broken, finished, the end of a line that stretched back 12,000 years. Now she held the future in her arms. "She has your stubbornness," Salith said softly. "I can already tell." Marcus laughed, tears running down his scarred face. "She has your beauty. Poor thing doesn't stand a chance." The news spread across the empire within hours. The hybrid princess had been born. The impossible child was real. Regent Malthois made one final, desperate move. He gathered his remaining allies. The nobles who still believed in pure blood and ancient tradition, they demanded that the child be declared illegitimate, an abomination that could never inherit the throne. They called for Salith to be stripped of her titles and Marcus to be executed as a corrupting influence. The emperor, weak as he was, summoned them all to his bedside. Kethvorith had ruled for 600 years. The wasting plague had stolen his strength, but not his mind. He looked at his brother with eyes that saw every scheme, every betrayal, every knife waiting in the darkness. "You have plotted against my daughter," the emperor said, his voice thin but steady. "You have tried to steal my throne. You have brought shame upon our house." Malthus started to speak, to protest, to spin new lies. The Emperor raised one trembling hand. Silence. I have heard enough of your words for one lifetime. He turned to the guards standing at attention around the room. Regent Malthus is hereby stripped of all titles and positions. He will leave the Empire immediately and never return. His co-conspirators will face trial for treason. Any who resist will be executed. The guards moved forward. Malthus's allies scattered like frightened animals, some surrendering immediately, others trying to flee. None escaped. Malthus himself stood frozen, his perfect composure finally shattered. You cannot do this. The bloodline, the purity, everything we have built was dying. The Emperor interrupted. Our empire was dying, brother. We were too proud to see it, too stubborn to change. My daughter found a way to save us, and you tried to destroy her for it. He looked at the guards. Take him away. Malthus was dragged from the room, still screaming protests. The Emperor beckoned Salith and Marcus forward. Bring me my granddaughter, he said. Salith placed the infant in his arms. The Emperor looked down at Alith with wonder in his ancient eyes. The child looked back at him without fear, one tiny hand reaching up to touch his face. She is strong, Kethforoth whispered. Stronger than any of us. The old blood and the new combined into something better. He looked at Marcus. You have given my family a future human. You have given my people hope. Whatever you want, whatever you need, it is yours. Marcus shook his head. I just want to be a good father, and a good husband if Salith will have me. The Emperor smiled, perhaps for the first time in years. She chose you long ago, soldier. Even an old man can see that. He lifted the child slightly. Presenting her to the room, I hereby recognize Alith Vorincol as Crown Princess of the Zerathi Empire, first of her line, heir to the throne of 7 moons, and I recognize Marcus Cole as royal consort, with all rights and privileges thereof. 3 weeks later, Emperor Kethforoth died peacefully in his sleep. The wasting plague finally claimed him, but he left the universe with a smile on his face. He had seen his granddaughter. He had secured the succession. He had given his people a chance. Salith became empress. The transition was not smooth. Traditionalist factions resisted for years, claiming the hybrid heir was invalid, demanding a return to the old ways. But they were fighting against time itself. Every year, Alith grew stronger. Every year, more Zerathi looked at her and saw not a corruption, but a miracle. And the miracle spread. Word of the hybrid birth reached every corner of the galaxy. Other ancient species, facing their own fertility crises, sent envoys to study Dr. Vasca's research. The Valor, the Kethmorai, Scythian peoples who had been dying for millennia, now saw a path forward. Humans became the most sought-after partners in the known universe. Their genetic adaptability, once dismissed as primitive instability, was now recognized as their greatest gift. They could bond with almost anyone, create life with almost anything. Where other species saw incompatibility, humans saw possibility. Within a generation, the first wave of hybrid children emerged across a dozen worlds. Half human, half something else, carrying the best of both their peoples. They were stronger, more adaptable, more creative than either parent species alone. They were the future. 20 years after Aleth's birth, Empress Salith stood on the balcony of the Crystal Palace, watching her daughter practice combat forms in the garden below. Alith moved with her father's explosive power and her mother's fluid grace. Combining techniques that had never been mixed before, Marcus stood beside his wife, gray now touching his temples. Humans aged faster than Zerathi, but that had never mattered to Salith. She would take 50 years with him, over 500 with anyone else. She's going to be a great leader, Marcus said. Watching their daughter, she has a good example to follow. Us. Salith leaned against him, her patterns glowing with the warm gold of contentment. Too good. Examples. I'm just a soldier. You were never just a soldier. She turned to face him, her violet eyes soft. You were the man who refused to give up. On the battlefield. in the arena. On me, her hand found his. Your people have a phrase for that? What is it? Marcus thought for a moment. Too stubborn to quit? No, the other one. The one with the drink. He laughed. Hold my beer? Yes, that one. She smiled, an expression that still felt like a gift every time he saw it. That is what humans are. The species that says, hold my beer, and then does the impossible. In the garden below, Aleph finished her forms and looked up at her parents. She waved, her gold and silver skin glowing in the light of the setting suns. Marcus waved back, his heart full of a joy he had never expected to find. He had started as a soldier in a forgotten war, fighting battles that seemed to have no meaning. Now he was a father, a husband, and the bridge between two peoples who were building a new future together. Across the galaxy, that future was taking shape. Hybrid children laughed and played on 100 worlds. Ancient species found new hope. The walls between peoples, built over millions of years, were slowly crumbling, and it had all started because one human refused to let a princess fight alone. Years later, historians would debate how the Great Change began. They would write books about genetics and politics, about treaties and traditions, but the Zarathi common folk knew the truth. They passed it down through generations, a new proverb to add to their ancient wisdom. Never underestimate a species, too stubborn to know when they're beaten. The humans had proven that, and in doing so, they had saved everyone.